I am Reed. I am 27, just an average dude. I've made tons of money mistakes in my 20s, and now I want to share everything I've learned to help you take control of your finances and your life. All right, so last week, Trump's legal team pulled off something pretty wild, something I honestly still can't quite wrap my head around. Most of you probably heard the big news through the headlines. The Trump family basically got a free pass, a full immunity from any past federal tax investigations. Or, to put it another way, the IRS FAA, that's the Internal Revenue Service. The federal agency that always seems to be at the top of the most feared list in America. FAA got absolutely clobbered by the Trump family. According to their agreement, no matter what federal tax issues the Trump family might have had historically, the IRS can't invesigate them anymore. This whole situation, where the IRS, an agency known for relentlessly going after everyone, is forced to essentially hand out a get-out-of-jail-free card to the Trump family, is so outrageous that it is easy to miss the truly genius part of this whole scheme. I mean, it's like something out of a movie, right? How did Trump's team design and execute this brilliant plan? Well, buckle up, because it's a wild ride. They sued themselves, then settled with themselves, and in doing so, created a mechanism for their own immunity. On top of that, they simultaneously managed to siphon off over $1 billion from the U.S. Treasury to build up a MAGA loyalist fund. Unbelievable. Welcome back to Little Mo's Micro, your go-to channel for the latest drama and insights. In this video, we're going to break down the sheer genius of Trump's legal team. This story actually begins way back in 2016. From his very first presidential campaign, Trump never voluntarily released his tax records. Now, that is not illegal, but it definitely broke with tradition. Every U.S. president since Nixon has publicly released their personal tax returns as a show of financial transparency. Trump, however, always used the excuse that his tax returns were under routine audit by the IRS, and therefore he couldn't release them. Of course, there were always rumors floating around that Trump was evading taxes, and the Democrats constantly used this as ammunition. Their reasoning was simple. If you've got nothing to hide, why are you so afraid to show it? Then, a guy named Charles Littlejohn enters the scene. With a name like that, you know he's got to be a serious character. Right? He used to work for Booz Allen Hamilton, a consulting giant that has a long history of scooping up massive outsourcing contracts from government agencies, like the Department of Defense, and you guessed it. The IRS as an outsourced technician, Littlejohn was assigned to the IRS for 5 years starting in 2008, and during that time he became intimately familiar with the IRS database. Underlying architecture, then he left in 2013. 4 years later, he proactively contacted his former employer, Booz Allen, and thanks to his extensive experience, was quickly rehired and reassigned to the IRS. According to Littlejohn's own testimony years later, he went back to Booz Allen in 2017 with a very specific goal in mind. He claimed he was furious after seeing Trump consistently refuse to release his tax returns. He believed Trump posed a serious threat to American democracy, and that the public had a right to know the truth about Trump's financial situation before the next election, so he decided to return to his old employer so he could be reassigned to the IRS. This way, he could sneak into the system and get his hands on Trump's tax records to make them public. Court records show that, leveraging his deep familiarity with the IRS database, Littlejohn used extremely broad search criteria to conduct a fuzzy search. This allowed him to successfully bypass the IRS specialized account monitoring and alert systems, which are designed for high-profile individuals, including the president. Then, using a modified iPod, he smoothly copied Trump's tax returns and other data for the past 15 years. Between August and October 2019, he anonymously provided this information in batches to the New York Times. In September 2020, just 2 months before the crucial presidential election that year, the New York Times published a series of articles based on Littlejohn's leaks. They revealed that Trump, the alleged billionaire real estate mogul and sitting US president, had paid only $750 in federal income tax in both 2016 and 2017, his first 2 years in office. And his golf courses and hotels, which he claimed were losing money for years, hadn't paid a single cent in federal income tax. This news instantly blew up, becoming a massive scandal that, to some extent, contributed to Trump losing the 2020 election to Biden. Littlejohn didn't stop there, though he also got hold of the tax returns for the top 7,600 wealthiest Americans, including Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and handed them over to the renowned independent media outlet ProPublica. While Littlejohn probably thought he was doing God's work, his actions were undeniably serious crimes. The police used technical means to track him down, and he was eventually charged with unauthorized disclosure of tax returns and tax return information. After reaching a plea agreement with prosecutors, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison in January 2024. The presiding federal judge publicly chastised Littlejohn in court for putting himself above the law and attempting to reshape the nation's political landscape through criminal acts. Little John's sentencing wasn't the end of this story. In January 2026, a year after Trump supposedly returned to the White House as president, he, his two sons, and their companies jointly sued the IRS and its parent agency, the U.S. Treasury Department. In the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida, they accused the IRS of gross negligence for failing to establish an effective data monitoring system, which led to the leak of Trump's tax information and caused devastating damage to the reputation of the Trump family and their businesses. They demanded $10 billion in compensation from the IRS and the Treasury Department at the same time. The Trump family also filed an accompanying lawsuit against the Department of Justice, claiming that the 2022 FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago over classified documents and the previous special counsel investigation into Trump-Russia collusion were both acts of political persecution and illegal harassment by the federal government. They demanded an additional $230 million from the Department of Justice. Now, usually you don't mess with the IRS. Seriously, ask Al Capone, the infamous Chicago gangster and Prohibition-era kingpin. He smuggled, extorted, bribed, and murdered his way through life, and local law enforcement and prosecutors couldn't touch him for years. But who finally put him in federal prison? The IRS. In 1931, Al Capone was convicted of income tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison, fined $50,000, and ordered to pay $215,000 plus interest and back taxes. Historically, not only mob bosses but even presidents have had to bend to the IRS. Nixon himself tried to weaponize the IRS during his presidency, using tax audits to target political enemies. But the IRS at the time maintained a high degree of professionalism and independence. Two IRS commissioners during Nixon's era bravely resisted presidential pressure, cleverly refusing to cooperate with efforts to use tax means to attack political opponents. They even pushed for Congress to strengthen protections for taxpayer information. Even more interestingly, in 1973, Nixon's own tax returns triggered an automatic alert in the IRS computer system. He was making a presidential salary of $200,000 but was using loopholes to deduct a huge chunk of his taxes, bringing his taxable income down to just a few $100s. Although some officials initially tried to sweep it under the rug, a righteous IRS employee leaked the story to the media. Public outrage across America exploded. Nixon was forced to defend himself, publicly declaring, "I am not a crook," and voluntarily requested an investigation. As a result, the IRS and Congress conducted a thorough investigation, confirmed the fraud, and slapped Nixon with a massive penalty of over $476,000. This amount was almost half of Nixon's net worth at the time, nearly bankrupting him. But now with Trump, things are different. This time, the IRS lost. And they lost badly, not only because the IRS was at fault in the first place, giving Trump an excuse to attack, but also because this lawsuit presented a legal anomaly, a judicial marvel. The entire case, inside and out, was filled with Trump's people. The lawsuit was filed in January 2026 when Trump was already the sitting president. Legally, he is the supreme head of federal executive agencies. This means that in this lawsuit, the plaintiffs were Trump, his two sons, and his companies, while the ultimate boss behind all the defendants, including the IRS, the Treasury Department, and the Department of Justice, was also Trump. It was literally Trump suing himself. Not only that, but on a practical level, the plaintiffs' lawyers were naturally hired by the Trump family. But even the defendants' lawyers were Trump's people. When a U.S. federal agency is sued as a defendant, it is supposed to be represented by employees from the Department of Justice who are responsible for developing defense strategies and representing the federal agency in court. After Loyal Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General, was fired, the current Attorney General has been acting Deputy Attorney General Todd Branch. And guess what? Branch just happens to be Trump's most loyal personal lawyer from before he became president. If any Department of Justice employee tried to demonstrate judicial independence in this case, they would undoubtedly be replaced or fired by acting Attorney General Branch, and that is exactly what happened. In reality, the IRS technocrats, being the tough nuts they are, didn't give up without a fight. They compiled a 25-page professional defense memo, ready to argue their case vigorously in court. Their defense strategy included emphasizing that crimes committed by outsourced employees do not equate to negligence by a government agency, and that the statute of limitations for the lawsuit had expired. However, this memo was ultimately not used in court because the Department of Justice lawyers representing the IRS refused to adopt it. The federal judge presiding over the lawsuit, Judge Williams, had actually noticed the enormous legal paradox in this case. Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution states that for a federal court to take on a case, that case must involve a genuine case or controversy. This means there must be a fundamental and real conflict of interest between the plaintiff and the defendant. Conversely, if the plaintiff and defendant are actually on the same side, or if one party can completely control the other, then this constitutes a collusive or sham lawsuit, and the judge can dismiss it. Trump's lawsuit against the IRS was precisely this situation. Both the plaintiff and the defendant were Trump's people. The judge didn't want to play along in this legal charade. In April, he issued an extremely stern ultimatum, demanding that the legal team representing the Trump family submit a written explanation by May 20th as to whether there was a genuine adversarial relationship in this lawsuit. Otherwise, he would dismiss the case. Now, here's the kicker. This couldn't be explained away because it was true they were all on the same side, and there was no genuine adversarial relationship. So, they decided to just lay their cards on the table. They stopped pretending. And so, we witnessed a truly astonishing scene in American legal history. 2 days before the judge's deadline, on May 18th, Trump's legal team announced that they were voluntarily withdrawing the lawsuit. They were dropping the case. And when a plaintiff voluntarily withdraws a lawsuit, the judge doesn't need to approve it. The federal judge immediately lost jurisdiction over the lawsuit. No lawsuit, no ultimatum to worry about. Oh my God, this is next level. But here's the more crucial part. Before officially withdrawing the lawsuit, the plaintiff, the Trump family, reached a historic settlement with the defendant. The Department of Justice, led by Trump's confidant, Todd Branch. The terms of the settlement included: first, the federal government would issue a formal written apology to Trump and his family, admitting to serious negligence in protecting their tax privacy. Second, the Department of Justice agreed to allocate $1.776 billion directly from the Federal Judgment Fund to establish an anti-weaponization fund. This fund would compensate individuals who, in the past, especially during the Biden administration, were allegedly persecuted by the federal government through the weaponization of justice. The total amount of this anti-weaponization fund is $1.776 billion, representing the year the United States was founded, 1776. At the same time, Trump promised that he and his family would not take a single penny from this fund.